Peoples of the world, welcome back to the EDH Community Theater, where I showcase real decks played by real people over on our Discord groups and on Spell Table. And today we have Kbotz's Kodama of the West Tree. Some good old-fashioned mono-green beatdown here. But before we get into the list itself, there's my socials. You can find my Discord handle, my TikTok handle, for those who like European-style board games like the Castles of Burgundy or Carcassonne. Welcome to, and a whole bunch of others. Look for me on Board Game Arena. And of course our Discord servers, both the server of many things and Dungeons of Cardboard. Great places to meet people and play some games. So, Kodama of the West Tree. Thank you for Kbotz for giving us this list. Excellent choice, as Kbotz put it. Who wouldn't want to have a +1/+1 counter synergy and a ramp piece in the command zone? So, great pick to get both of those things. So, a green and 2 for the Kodama of the West Tree. It's a 3/3 spirit with reach. That's pretty handy, being able to defend against flying creatures. Modified creatures you control have trample, which is pretty sweet. A reminder on modification: anything with a counter on it, anything that's equipped or enchanted, is modified. And whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So yeah, the idea, of course, is get your Kodama out there, swing with modified creatures, get more lands. More lands means more modified creatures hit the battlefield, so on and so forth. And my sort of pack one, pick one, that's what I'm going to call it from here on out, is my pack one, pick one. Bow of Nylea. Excellent pick because I love this card with Kodama. It's got that interaction between Deft Touch and Trample. For those who don't know the card, of course, 3 mana for this legendary artifact enchantment. Or enchantment artifact, depending if you want to read it in alphabetical order or not. Attacking creatures you control have Deft Touch, which means if you attack with a modified creature, let's say they put 6 blockers in front of it and you're attacking with a modified creature that is a 7/7. You only need to assign 1 damage per creature to kill it, regardless of what their toughness is. And then anything left over still tramples through. So that interaction between Trample and Deft Touch is in play when you have the Bow of Nylea out. The fact that it can also modify creatures by handing out +1/+1 counters as an activated ability is really sweet. It's got a few other toolboxy effects as well. So, my pack 1, pick 1. Bow of Nylea. We do have a couple of infinite mana combos. There's we'll talk about that as we go through the list. But of course the idea is modified creatures, swing, ramp, play more creatures, swing, ramp, repeat. Even though we're playing mono green, we've got lots of land ramp, we are still running the Arcane Signet here to keep our number of mana sources up. Blackblade Reforged, a great way to modify our commander. Throw this onto Kodama, swing, especially once we've got all our forests in play. The Extraplanar Lens. For those who may not have seen this, 3 mana for this artifact. It has Imprint, so when this enters the battlefield, you may exile target land you control in this instance. And whenever a land with the same name as the exiled card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana to their mana pool of any type that land produced. So the idea here is that you use Extraplanar Lens and you exile a snow-covered forest with it. The deck runs 19 snow-covered forests. So the idea here is, since it's unlikely your opponents are playing snow-covered lands, once the Extraplanar Lens hits, you're the only one really benefiting from it. And it's very, very rare that your opponents would be playing a snow-covered forest and also benefit from this effect. If you just did this with a regular forest, it is far more likely for your opponents to also get the double mana. It's a very old trick, one that is probably more relevant now than it was 5-6 years ago. So, a great way to ramp up some extra mana that way. Other artifacts we're going to look at include Luxior, Gyada's Gift. Great piece of equipment, one of the standout cards from New Capenna. 1 mana to cast. 3 mana to equip it to a creature, 1 to equip it to a Planeswalker. The deck does run 1 Planeswalker, we'll talk about that later, but that is not why it's here. It says enchanted permanent isn't a Planeswalker, equipped permanent is not a Planeswalker and is a creature in addition to its other types. And also, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. So the idea here, of course, is to combo it with... Well, so that combos with a ham sandwich, honestly. Literally everything combos with Devoted Druid and goes infinite. So the idea here, of course, is Luxior onto Devoted Druid, infinite green mana. Rocking a Soul Ring, of course, and the Great Henge. It's a mana rock, but it makes perfect sense in a mono green deck. It says it costs 9 mana. It'll never ever cost 9 mana. If you are paying 9 mana to cast the Great Henge, something went horribly wrong in your game. But it ramps you up, it gives you some life, it gives your creatures +1/+1 counters. It's everything that we want in this deck. And of course, someone's going to throw a board wipeout and try to wipe out our modified creatures at some point, so the Ozlith will help protect our +1/+1 counters. Other creatures that we have in the deck include Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. That's Lunchbox's favorite card. 5 mana for an XX, X being the number of lands you control, and non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to other types. And this is actually a piece of another infinite combo. You can combine it with either the Extraplanar Lens or with, and I'm just going to go ahead to the enchantment, Leyline of Abundance to double up your mana. So all of a sudden you're tapping a creature for 2 mana. Pilipala. Anytime you see Pilipala in a deck, there are shenanigans going on. And the shenanigan here is that with Ashaya, this becomes a land creature, which means you can tap it to add a mana. But if you have your, not so much the Extraplanar Lens, because it doesn't turn it into a snow-covered forest, but if you have your Leyline of Abundance, Pilipala all of a sudden taps for 2 mana. Then you spend that 2 mana to untap the Pilipala and add a green to your mana pool. And you bank it and you save it and you go infinite mana. So Pilipala, Ashaya, and the Leyline of Abundance is your other infinite mana combo. Beast Whisper, whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Rocking the Blightsteel. 12 mana is surprisingly easy to achieve in this deck. And of course, Blightsteel ends games in a hurry. So does the Crater Hoof Behemoth. Once you've got a few creatures out, just go nuts. Elvish Piper. We're going old school on this one. 4 mana for this 1/1 Elf Shaman. But if this gets left alone, then you'll be able to start dumping creatures onto the battlefield for a single green mana. Insane stuff. And of course, Rebecca's art on this one. Chef's Kiss. The Evolution Sage. Land comes down, proliferate your +1/+1 counters. Forgotten Ancient, anyone casts a spell, it gets 1/1 counter that you can eventually move to your other creatures. Finhorn Elves, these 1 mana dorks make it so easy to ramp out Kodama on turn 2. The Gyre Sage has evolved, so you play a creature that's bigger than it gets +1/+1 counter. That's all we need. Incubation Druid, once this has a +1/+1 counter on it, it's a dork that taps for 3 mana. Llanowar Elves, the classic. Lotus Cobra, land comes down, you get an additional mana. Loyal Guardian, this works great with Kodama. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Modify everything. Oran Frostfang, it's 5 mana for this 2/6 snake. Attacking creatures you control have Death Touch, so again, that trample and Death Touch synergy is in play, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Rocking the Protean Hulk. We don't have any Protean Hulk combos in the deck, but it is a great value piece. Ravenous Slime. This cannot be blocked by creatures of power 2 or less, so it cannot just simply be chumped. And if a creature an opponent controls would die, it's instead exiled, and you put a number of 1/1 counters on to the slime equal to its power. So, some excellent graveyard hate here. Rishkar, of course, comes down and spreads out some +1/+1 counters on ETB. Seedborn Muse. Untap all of the things. It's especially fun to, swing out at your opponents and then untap and defend yourself from the crackback. Spike Weaver. 4 mana, has a 0/0, comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. It's 2. You can spend 2, remove a counter from the Weaver to put it somewhere else, or you can pay 1 and remove a counter from the Weaver as a fog effect. Great piece here. Thundering Nightmare. This is a funny one. 5 mana for this 3/3 Horse Spirit with Soul Bond. So when this comes down, if there's another creature on the board, you can pair it with that. If this is not already paired, then the next creature that comes in can pair with it. Actually, that's not true. So Soul Bond is only when the Thundering Nightmare comes in. It's not a mechanic I've ever played with, honestly. But I've seen it do some work with other cards. And as long as this is paired with another creature, each of those creatures have, whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a 1/1 counter. Kbotz says it's really, really fun to see this on the paired with the, not the Devoted Druid, but the Gyre Sage, because then every time your opponent casts a spell, it makes the Gyre Sage bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden it's tapping for 15 mana on its own. The Tireless Provisioner. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you get your choice of a food or a treasure token. Undergrowth Champion. Where this is dealt damage, while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, you prevent the damage and just remove the counter. So this thing sticks around forever. Vigor. Great way to defend your creatures, especially when this is on the battlefield. That means whenever your creatures are dealt damage, they in fact get bigger, not smaller. Vorinclex for the double counter effect, of course. Walking Ballista. Once you have your infinite mana, Walking Ballista just ends the game right then and there. Whip-Tongued Hydra. When this enters the battlefield, destroy all creatures with flying. Not a lot of flying in this deck, and not a lot of defense against flying other than our commander, so this is a great addition here to stop that problem. And Yisan, the Wanderer Bard. 3 mana to cast, 3 mana to activate, put a verse counter on Yisan, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to the number of verse counters on Yisan, put it onto the battlefield. I find this card a little slow personally. I know it's a pretty popular creature, but I personally find it kind of slow. But it definitely helps us toolbox. We can get out our mana dorks early, and then once we get to 3, 4, 5 mana, we start bringing out the big toys. Enchantments, Branching Evolution. Hot take: this is strictly better in a +1/+1 counter themed deck than Doubling Season. So 3 mana, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, you put twice as many. And it's only 3 mana. That difference between 3 and 5 mana is huge. Speaking of huge, is Concordant Crossroads, a much needed reprint in Double Masters. 1 green, World Enchantment. World Enchantment, of course, means only 1 World Enchantment, regardless of its name, can be in play at any given time. And all creatures have haste. Defense of the Heart. If our opponents have too many creatures out and lets Defense of the Heart pop off, we can actually go get a Shaya and Pilipala like right off the hop and just go nuts. Doubling Season, the OG is still here. Yes, Branching Evolution is strictly better, but Doubling Season still puts in a lot of work here. Growing Rites of Itlimoc will have plenty of creatures to turn over to flip this over into Cradle of the Sun, and we have our budget Gaia's Cradle effect. Moving on to the Guardian Project. If a non-code token creature enters the battlefield under control, I draw a card. Hall of Gemstone. This is a spicy piece. It's 3 mana for this enchant world, so this cannot be on the battlefield at the same time as Concordant Crossroads. That's okay. Let's look at what this does. During each player's upkeep, that player chooses a color. Until end of turn, each mana-producing land produces mana of the chosen color instead of its normal type. So, if you're running, if you drop this against the Mardu deck, well, guess what? That Mardu deck has to pick and choose what color they can use. They can't use them all. The only defense against that, of course, is Mana Rocks. It doesn't affect Mana Rocks, but still, it can definitely mess with multicolored decks hard. Speaking of hard, Hardened Scales. Whenever a +1/+1 counter would be put on a creature you control, this puts an additional one on them. Kenrith's Transformation, great removal piece. Turn something into an elk, and you get to draw a card. We've already talked about Leyline of Abundance and its ability to double up with mana from your mana sources. Retreat to Khazandu. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you can either gain 2 life or put a counter on a creature. Spoiler alert, you're likely putting a counter on a creature. Roaring Earth also does this. Whenever land comes down, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature or vehicle you control. No vehicles in this deck, doesn't need that. If you get the super late game, you can always use the channel and just dump a bunch of counters on a land and turn it into a huge creature with haste. Sylvan Library, of course, to filter through our cards. And Unnatural Growth to double the power and toughness of each creature we control during combat. It doesn't matter if it's your combat or your opponent's. Alright, some instants and sorceries now. Beast Within, of course, one of the best removal spells in our format. Blessed Respite. Prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn, and target player shuffles their graveyard into their library. So this can hate on Reanimator decks, or put some tools from your graveyard back into your own library. So fantastic stuff here. Horde of Calling, classic creature tutor. Go get your best creature, whatever the table calls for. Put it right onto the battlefield. Classic Fog. We're swinging out a lot, so having a couple of Fog effects to defend our face is a fantastic choice. Force of Vigor. If it's not your turn, we can exile a green card from our hand and destroy up to 2 artifacts or enchantments at instant speed. Otherwise, we pay 4 for this effect. But the fact that this can be a 0 mana removal spell is impressive. Heroic Intervention, of course, to defend our table. Hinder Vines, another Fog effect. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures with no 1/1 counters on them. So you can actually use this on offense. So if someone is going to block and kill some of your creatures, you can protect your creatures while still dealing damage yourself. Inspiring Call, great little card draw spell. Got to be careful with it because you do need to have creatures with +1/+1 counters on it on the battlefield, but it's not that big a hoop for this deck to jump. Master's Rebuke, target creature you control deals damage to it equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control, so a great little piece of instant speed removal. Again, this relies on you having a creature on the battlefield, but that's what this deck does, so that's not going to be a problem. Obscuring Haze, with your commander on the battlefield, this is a 0 mana Fog. Ram Through, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to a creature you don't control. And then if your creature has trample, which that's what our commander does, is give all our team trample, any extra damage then goes to our opponent. Silk Guard, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to X target creatures you control. And also give your board Hexproof. Fantastic card. This is a very, very new one, I think, from the Neon Dynasty Commander decks. And of course, Worldly Tutor to go get your best creature, put it on top of your library. Our sorcery is just for the Finale of Devastation. You get to search our library or graveyard for a creature card with mana value X, put it onto the battlefield. If X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X/+X and haste. This ends the game in a hurry if this resolves. Smell Fear, a great way to proliferate the +1/+1 counters on our creatures, and also take an opponent's creature off the board. 3 visits for the ramp spell. Let's go get Eddy Force, put it onto the battlefield, untapped and ready to go. And of course the classic Infect finisher, Triumph of the Hordes. Just the one Planeswalker. I'm sure you figured out who it is by now, but if you haven't, it's Nissa, who shakes the world. It says whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. Yes, please. It also gives us, turns our lands into creatures with 1/1 counters on it. Also, yes, please. And the -8 says lands you control have indestructible. Search your library for any number of forests, put them onto the battlefield. So you can actually thin out your deck with a snap of a finger. So about our lands, we've already talked about the snow-covered forest. There are 19 of them in total. There's only 30 lands in total in this deck, which I personally find on the low side. But once your deck gets going, you can pull all those lands and catch up in a hurry. So the risk is perhaps worth the reward here. So the other lands that we haven't talked about yet, of course, Beseju Who Endures. Great piece of artifact, enchantment, or non-basic removal. We've got Karn's Bastion because this proliferates creatures. Lair of the Hydra. So this is just a creature I suggest a creature. It's a land that can be a creature when we need it to be. I personally like this card. I run it in a bunch of decks as well. So, Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. We're playing monocolor, so this is sort of our best monocolor ramp accelerant, shall we say? Opal Palace. Excellent choice here with the Opal Palace. Anytime we cast our commander, yes, it basically cost us an extra mana to cast our commander, but then he comes in modified already with 1/1 counters. Or on Reef the Vastwood. This enters the battlefield tapped, but it does tap for a green mana, and also taps to put a 1/1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Running the Reliquary Tower here. Rogue's Passage for the unblockability. Tyrite Sanctum. We can eventually use this to turn one of our creatures, ideally Kodama, into a god and eventually make it indestructible. War Room. Anytime you put card draw on your mana base, I'm a fan, and that's what this is. And of course, you have Mana Cradle of Growth to make sure everything is a forest. And that is Kbotz's Kodama of the West Tree deck. As far as sort of my suggestions, ideas, concepts, I'm only going to suggest a couple of cards here. One is an additional land, because I personally would never play with only 30 lands. Yes, I can see why you would here. Having land ramp in the command zone makes it a more viable option, but still a little risky for my taste. So I would suggest one more land, and this is the one that I would put, Llanowar Reborn. It's got a +1/+1 counter on it, and we can use it to graft onto any creature that comes onto the battlefield after this hits. We can throw it on our Llanowar Elves, and then it's ready to swing once we cast our Kodama, for example. Or this counter could go into Kodama itself. Either way. The other thing I noticed with the deck is that it doesn't have a lot of creatures that already come into play with +1/+1 counters, so I figured Yorvo would be a fun possibility as well. And creatures like him. There's a whole bunch of green creatures that enter with +1/+1 counters already on it. They're pre-modified and ready to go. So I figured Yorvo would be an example of this, but there are tons of examples throughout the history of the game, and this is a direction one could go when building a Kodama of the West Tree deck. And on that, well, again, Kbotz, thank you for submitting this one. We haven't had a chance to play yet, I don't think, so we should probably get around to that soon. And if you want to play with me, Kbotz, or any of the guys, look for us on our Discord groups. Also, be sure to check out some of my other content. There's my channel, and there's a couple other videos for you to check out. And we will see you all again next time. Bye for now.